So there are two ways to become part of the minority group. And let's talk about those two ways. So let's look at this. This is a sign, it's in California. It shows people crossing an expressway. Yet this is actually on an expressway. Watch out for people crossing. These people are choosing to cross the border. The first way to become part of the minority group is you cross the border. You decide to go to an area where you're going to have less rights. These people are choosing to cross the border. Can you think of individuals that were forced to cross the border? All right, here's a map. Here's the continent of Africa. Here are the trade routes of slaves crossing the ocean. These people were forced to cross the border. So, the first way to become part of the minority group is where you go to an area where you have less rights. What is the second way to become part of the minority group? What would be the opposite of you crossing the border? Here's a map of Australia. Here it says, Australia for the Australians. And from 1901 to 1973, no minorities could not move to Australia. It was a white Australia policy. The original Australians were called the Aborigines. So what's the opposite of you crossing the border? Here's Mexico. Mexico used to be all of this area right here. And then one day, that's right, the border crosses you. You live here, the border crosses you, and now you're part of the minority group. Here is an old sign. This is from Australia. It says, no Chinese. So they were not allowed because of the white Australian policy. So whether it's Australia, Mexico, the second way to become part of the minority is the border crosses you. A couple of more examples. We were talking about Australia. Here's the flag. Steve Irwin, Russell Crowe, very famous Australians, but these are European Australians. The original Australians are right here with a baby kangaroo called a Joey. They have blonde hair because of the sun. And here they are, enslaved. The example, the border crosses you. Another example. Now remember, you may see this on an exam, so make sure you know an example of the border crosses you. The Aborigines of Australia. Who are the original Canadians? The original Canadians were not the French. Actually, they're referred to as First Nation individuals. These are the original Canadians right here. So once again, this is another example of the border crossing you. So if you're taking notes, which you probably should be to get ready for the exam, let's write down discrimination and prejudice. Now these two words mean different things. People think, oh, well, don't they mean the same? In actuality, they don't. They mean very different things. One of them is an action to do something. One is only the thought process. Which one of these two words would you say is the thought process? It's prejudice. Let's write down. Prejudice is an attitude, but you don't actually have to do anything about it. To discriminate is actually the action, the doing something. Now, some people are prejudiced. They have an attitude, but they actually don't discriminate. They don't do anything about it. Now, almost everyone has some form of prejudice, and it doesn't have to be by race. For example, many seniors are prejudiced against freshmen. They think they act immature. Now, they don't discriminate. They just have a prejudice against freshmen. Now, is it possible to discriminate but not be prejudiced? Well, the answer is yes. For example, in World War II, many of the soldiers of Germany actually discriminated because they had to. But in actuality, they didn't actually have a prejudice. They were just doing their job. Famous sociologist who studied both prejudice and discrimination, let's write down his name, W.E.B. Du Bois. What do you need to know? He was an African American, here in the PhD from Harvard, and he co-founded the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He wrote several books about discrimination and prejudice. He grew up in a town where there wasn't any prejudice or discrimination. However, once he moved away from his town, he experienced a lot of both. And he wrote about it in several books to help reduce the concept of both prejudice and discrimination. Now, what is the oldest type of prejudice and discrimination? It's against individuals that are Jewish. The oldest type of prejudice and discrimination is referred to as a word not very heard often in South Texas, anti-Semitism. This is anti-Jewish prejudice. Now, examples of this. In the First Crusade in 1096, they were discriminated against. They were exiled from England in 1290, exiled from Spain 1492, exiled from Portugal in 1497. These are some examples of anti-Semitism. And of course, in World War II, Nazis, prejudice against the Jewish religion. All right, let's talk about two ethnic groups, two of the oldest ethnic groups that exist. Now, if you're taking notes, and you should be again, to make sure you're prepared for the exam, we're going to write a name, and then we're going to scroll down and write down like this. So let's talk about the name we're going to write at the very top. So let's write down the name Abraham. Write down Abraham, and then we're going to draw two arrows just like so. Now, the two oldest ethnic groups came from Abraham. Now, Abraham was going to have the chosen people, and his wife was going to have a son, and they were going to be the chosen individuals. However, Abraham and his wife could not have a child, so it was agreed upon that Abraham would have a child with the live-in help, servant. So Abraham did. Her name was Hagar, and they had a son, and his name was Ishmael. So he did have a son. However, it ended up that his wife did become pregnant. Her name is Sarah, and her son's name is Isaac. So now, who are the chosen individuals? You have Hagar with Ishmael and Sarah with Isaac. Hagar did have Ishmael first. However, he did have a son with Sarah. These two would be the origin of the two different ethnic groups that we're going to talk about. Who is the son of promise? So, over here we would say, well, according to the Quran, it's Hagar and Ishmael. However, if you're going by the Torah, it is Sarah and Isaac. So people that are Jewish follow the Torah, Sarah and Isaac. And people that are Muslim, the religion of Islam, they follow the Quran, Hagar and Ishmael. These two ethnic groups are some of the oldest ethnic groups that exist. And this is the origin of both of those.